So today we're turning our attention towards William Shakespeare, 1564-1616. Shakespeare is neither the first nor the last word of English literature, and there is no reason to surround the bard with near religious respect. However, devoting a whole lecture to him is fully justified inasmuch as in-depth knowledge of his life and literary production is one of the keys to successful English studies, if only because undergraduates and graduates are bound to deal with him repeatedly all the way to the agrégation state examinations, for which a Shakespeare play is always on the syllabus. But even beyond this narrow French academic context, all human beings given access to high culture, lucky enough to be given access to high culture, deserve to know more about this genius of mankind, some of whose plays resonate with our life experience regardless of time and place. All men and women on the planet can relate to King Lear, to Hamlet, and to Macbeth. A father's betrayal by his own children, that's King Lear. A young being coming to understand the bitterness of existence for the first time in his life, that's Hamlet. The throes of crime and punishment at the hands of fate in Macbeth, well, these are universal situations. We have ample proof from, say, the magnificent films of Kurosawa to, okay, let's be bold, the recent global success of Game of Thrones. We have ample proof that Shakespeare's art does not belong to Western or English culture alone. Hence this special lecture. On the right here, you have one of the few images we possess, and even that one is in fact subject to some controversy, but okay, let's assume this is authentic. This is the famous Chandos portrait, to be found nowadays in the National Portrait Gallery. There's nothing special about it. As you can see, it's painted in the latter years of Shakespeare, probably 1610. He is, of course, definitely middle-aged, but he is still wearing the iconic Elizabethan earring. Beyond this, well, I guess the only special thing is the extraordinary mystery in his expression and in his eyes. Now, this word mystery will afford me fairly easy transition to the second point, which is his life and the mysteries of his life. I have sent a fact sheet on Shakespeare's life and times, but I prefer to go over the same narrative twice to hammer out a few key notions. As you know, Shakespeare was born in Stratford-upon-Avon. That's a small town in Warwickshire, probably 1,500-400 inhabitants at the close of the 16th century. This is where Shakespeare was born, the child of Mary Arden and John Shakespeare, a fairly well-to-do merchant. He was a glove maker, who in the course of his life rose to the distinguished position of alderman. Interestingly enough, the family had numerous ties with the old faith, that's Catholicism. By 1564, of course, Catholicism had long been replaced by the new faith, the new established Church of England, and Catholicism was banned. I have insisted on that aspect of religious repression in the previous lectures. This connection has generated one of the many issues about Shakespeare, and a number of scholars have even argued that Shakespeare and his family were secret Catholics. Well, there are pros and cons in this debate. Remember, I have mentioned it, that even his physical appearance is the subject of controversies. Not everybody agrees the portraits we have are actually authentic. Another problem is that of his education. We know that at the age of 7 he was sent to the free grammar school at Stratford, but he only received a modest education. We also know that there were at the time companies of touring players who may have performed in Stratford, and Shakespeare might have attended a number of those performances at the town hall. Still, he was definitely not one of those university wits. You remember we mentioned, for instance, Christopher Marlowe. He never had such a good education. He was probably taught a little Latin, but not much beyond that. So how did this young man from the provinces came decades later to attain this extraordinary level of mastery in the language? We don't know. In the same manner, something must have happened in 1577 or 78 when the boy was removed from school. Maybe his father fell from grace. Some scholars have formulated the hypothesis that being a secret Catholic, he was maybe denounced as something. Well, we don't know. Shakespeare had to be either apprenticed to his father's business or he had to earn an independent living of another kind. What happened next is the first series of what is known as lost years, simply black holes in the continuum of Shakespeare's biography where really we don't know. The next thing we know is that 5 years later, at the age of 18, he married Anne Hathaway. They had 3 children, Susanna and twins, Hamlet and Judith. Hamlet, his only son, died in infancy in 96. And then Shakespeare left his wife and left Stratford. Why? Well, again, it's quite unclear. The traditional story runs that he had stolen deer in the park of the local magnate, member of parliament, Sir Thomas Lucy. And that maybe because there was this poaching, there were threats that he could be prosecuted, and maybe he had to basically go away. But this is just a story, traditional story. In 1587, we find Shakespeare in London, where he becomes connected with the world of the stage. Again, what happened between 85 and 87 is a second series of lost years. We don't know. Now, how did he come to be connected with the stage? Did he actually hold the bridle of gentlemen's horses outside the theatres? That could be. It's probable that he began very humbly. We don't have any exact document telling us when he was accepted as an actor in the Lord Chamberlain's Men, but he belonged to them in 94. So never forget, Shakespeare was both an actor and a playwright. He never gave up on that till the end of his life, until he retired. He was an actor as well as a playwright. He became, for instance, we know, a member of the King's Men in 1603. The two capacities side by side were not too unusual, but how did he come to write? And then he did it not before 30 years of age, whereas contemporaries started much younger. You remember those university wits, they all started much younger. How did he manage to get his scripts accepted? This young man from nowhere, from the provinces, without much of an education, how did he manage? He was not one of the university wits at all. So that's another grey, shadowy area. Well, maybe because of the quality of his poetry. Okay, that's possible, because we know, together with the first plays, he started publishing poetry. We've got two long narrative poems, Venus and Adonis, 93, and The Rape of Lucrece, 94. They are both dedicated to the Earl of Southampton. Some of the sonnets were also probably composed during that period, but we don't know. What happened during the ensuing years is an intense creativity span, pretty short in fact, at best 17 years. The details, the biographical details, are very few. The story of his mind is to be found in the dramatic works, in the plays themselves. I guess that's the best answer we can bring. So there's a fundamental creative period of 17 years. All the plays, all the major plays, come from that period. In 1611, and of course we'll come back to them, in 1611, Shakespeare retired. He went back to Stratford. He had purchased a nice house there. You can still visit it today, new place. Then he spent the last years of his life taking an interest in municipal affairs. He received visits from his old London friends, Drayton, Ben Jonson, and we know he made occasional journeys to London. We have his will, his last will and testament, because he made it a fortnight before his daughter married. And then on April the 23rd, 1616, same year as Cervantes, he died, and he was buried in the church of, Stratford, obviously. There was a monument erected to his memory in Poets' Corner, the Abbey of Westminster, but only in 1741. The house in which he was born was acquired by a public subscription, and today you have a Shakespearean museum, which is of course visited every year by thousands of pilgrims. Right, so this was his life. Of course, I don't need you to know everything about his life, but I need you to know about the black holes, the mysteries, the lost years, the issues, religion, education that remain mysteries today, and I need you to really understand this intensive creative period of some 17 years before his retirement back to Stratford. So try to have this fundamental map, biographical map in your head.